The airport buzzed with life, a symphony of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and muffled announcements echoing across the terminal. Among the sea of travelers, Maya stood out, not for her glamour or confidence, but for her exhaustion. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly as she shuffled through the crowd, one hand dragging a small suitcase, the other clutching her purse tightly. Her face, framed by curls that had gone frizzy from the day's humidity, was etched with fatigue. Every step seemed to weigh her down, a mix of her pregnancy and the emotional toll of traveling alone. She paused by a bench, hoping for a moment's rest, but found it occupied by passengers scrolling on their phones, oblivious to her discomfort. Maya took a deep breath and pressed on. She knew she had no choice. Her husband had insisted on meeting her here, making special arrangements for their trip, but the journey so far had been grueling. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, trying to ignore the glances from fellow travelers. Some were curious, others dismissive, judgmental stares that made her wish she could disappear. By the private jet terminal, a group of flight attendants stood in their crisp uniforms, chatting amongst themselves. Their laughter was bright and sharp, like polished glass. One of them, a tall woman with flawless makeup and an air of superiority, spotted Maya. She nudged her colleague and gestured toward Maya with a subtle tilt of her head, a smirk playing on her lips. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn," the tall one muttered loud enough for Maya to hear. The others chuckled, their eyes flickering over Maya's worn outfit and scuffed suitcase. Maya froze for a moment, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she tightened her grip on her luggage, squared her shoulders, and moved past them. Behind her, the flight attendants returned to their chatter, their laughter ringing out like a cruel reminder of the invisible lines society loved to draw. Maya didn't know it yet, but this moment would soon turn into one she'd never forget. And neither would they. Maya finally reached the small waiting area for the private jet terminal, her steps slower now, her back aching. She glanced around, noticing the stark difference between this space and the bustling main terminal. Everything here was sleek and polished. Marble floors, plush seating, and a quiet that felt heavy, almost suffocating. The same group of flight attendants from earlier stood by the counter, their voices low but unmistakably carrying the tone of gossip. Maya did her best to ignore them, focusing instead on steadying her breathing and easing the strain on her legs. But Rachel, the tall and poised leader of the group, wasn't about to let Maya pass unnoticed. Her sharp eyes locked on Maya's simple clothes and tired demeanor, and a sneer curled on her lips. With a tone that dripped with condescension, she turned to her colleagues and said loudly enough for Maya to hear, "Some people think they belong in places they clearly can't afford." The other attendants stifled laughs, though their glances betrayed their agreement. Maya froze, her heart sinking. The words hit her harder than she expected, slicing through her resolve. She looked down at her sneakers, suddenly feeling every inch of the judgment Rachel had so cruelly thrown her way. Clutching her belly protectively, Maya swallowed hard and took a deep breath. She wanted to respond, to stand up for herself, but the fatigue of the day and the emotions swirling inside her left her silent. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly and continued walking, willing herself not to cry. Behind her, Rachel smirked, clearly satisfied with herself. To her, Maya was just another outsider trying to step into a world she didn't belong to, a nobody trying to play dress-up. Little did she know, her assumptions couldn't have been more wrong. Maya reached a quiet corner of the lounge, sitting down and letting her hands rest on her belly. As she felt the small, reassuring kicks of her baby, a soft smile broke through her hurt. She whispered to herself, "They don't know anything about us." Rachel, still standing near the counter, carried on with her conversation, completely unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. Maya sat quietly, her hands resting on her belly, her gaze fixed on the large window overlooking the runway. The sting of Rachel's words lingered, but she chose not to let them consume her. She'd faced far worse in her life. This was nothing compared to what she and her husband, Ethan, had endured together. As the hum of the terminal buzzed around her, Maya's thoughts drifted back to the early days of their relationship. She remembered the tiny one-room apartment they'd shared when they were first married. The walls had been thin, the winters brutal, and the bills relentless. Ethan worked multiple jobs, often coming home late at night, his hands rough and his eyes heavy with exhaustion. They had almost nothing, yet they had everything that mattered: each other. Ethan had always been a dreamer, but he was also a doer. Maya recalled the countless nights he stayed up sketching plans, crunching numbers, and poring over books, teaching himself the ins and outs of business. She'd sit beside him, offering him coffee and encouragement, even when she wasn't sure how they'd afford groceries the next week. "Just wait," he'd say with that determined smile. "One day we'll make it, I promise you." And he had kept that promise. Maya's eyes softened as she thought about how far they'd come. Ethan's small startup had grown into a thriving business, one built not just on hard work but on the values they both held dear: integrity, kindness, and resilience. They could afford luxuries now, but Maya had never let it change her. She still valued humility, still believed in treating everyone with respect, no matter their circumstances. Her hand moved gently over her belly. This child she carried was a symbol of everything she and Ethan had built together: love, perseverance, and hope for the future. Rachel's cruel words had tried to reduce her to an outsider, someone unworthy of being in this space. But Maya knew better. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone, least of all someone like Rachel. So, Maya sat tall, her chin slightly raised, her quiet dignity speaking louder than any words ever could. She chose not to let pettiness drag her down, because she understood something Rachel didn't. True worth isn't about appearances or wealth. It's about character. And in that, Maya knew she stood tall. She smiled faintly as the baby kicked again, a comforting reminder of her purpose. Rachel's sneer might have stung, but it didn't define her. It never would. The faint hum of conversation in the lounge was interrupted by the distinct roar of an approaching engine. Heads turned as a sleek, gleaming private jet descended gracefully onto the runway, its polished exterior catching the late afternoon sun. The air in the terminal shifted, buzzing with anticipation. Rachel immediately straightened her posture, her expression transforming from smug indifference to professional poise. The other flight attendants quickly followed her lead, smoothing their uniforms and adjusting their hair. Even the ground staff moved with urgency, preparing to greet what they assumed was a high-profile guest. "Looks like someone important is arriving," Rachel murmured to one of her colleagues, a hint of excitement in her tone. She glanced toward the runway, already envisioning a moment of recognition or even praise from the affluent passenger stepping off the jet. Maya, still seated in the corner, quietly watched the commotion unfold. Her calm demeanor remained unshaken, though a small, knowing smile tugged at her lips. Slowly she stood, placing a hand on her belly as she moved closer to the large windows. Her movements were deliberate and unhurried, a stark contrast to the hurried chaos around her. The soft glow of confidence in her eyes caught the attention of a few onlookers, who began to wonder about this seemingly ordinary woman standing so composed amidst the luxury and bustle. Rachel glanced at Maya briefly, her brow furrowing. The quiet poise Maya exuded was unsettling, though Rachel quickly dismissed it. Surely, this tired, plainly dressed woman couldn't possibly be connected to the sleek jet now taxiing toward the terminal. Maya stood by the glass, her hands lightly resting on her belly, her eyes focused on the jet. Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and anticipation. She knew exactly who was about to step off that plane, and the moment couldn't come soon enough. Behind her, whispers and speculation filled the air. Who was on the jet? A celebrity? A business mogul? Everyone was waiting for the answer, but no one more so than Maya. As the jet came to a stop and the staircase extended, all eyes were fixed on the door. The atmosphere grew thick with expectation, and even Rachel found herself holding her breath, eager to greet the arriving guest. Maya's smile grew ever so slightly. The moment of truth was here, and she knew it was about to change everything. The door to the jet opened, and the anticipation in the terminal reached its peak. A moment later, a man appeared at the top of the staircase, his confident presence immediately commanding attention. Ethan was strikingly handsome, his tailored suit fitting him perfectly, the sharp lines and rich fabric reflecting a quiet sophistication. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his warm, charismatic smile carried both charm and authority. He moved with the ease of someone accustomed to success. Yet his expression softened the instant his eyes found Maya. Rachel's perfectly practiced smile faltered as she watched Ethan descend the steps. Her heart raced. This wasn't just any passenger. This man exuded wealth and importance far beyond her expectations. She quickly composed herself, preparing to greet him. But what happened next left her stunned. Ethan didn't even glance at her or the other flight attendants. His focus was solely on Maya. "Hey, love," he called out warmly, his voice carrying across the terminal. His smile widened as he crossed the space between them, closing the distance with long, purposeful strides. Maya's face lit up as Ethan approached. She felt a familiar wave of comfort and love wash over her, the kind only he could bring. When he reached her, Ethan cupped her face gently, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone full of genuine concern as he glanced down at her belly. "I told you I'd come get you sooner if you needed me to." "I'm fine," Maya replied softly, her voice steady but filled with affection. "I just couldn't wait to see you." Ethan's gaze lingered on her for a moment, then he slid an arm around her waist, effortlessly taking her bag in his free hand. He turned to her again, his voice tender. "Let's get you comfortable, okay?" Behind them, Rachel stood frozen, her jaw slack. She looked from Ethan to Maya, her earlier sneer replaced by sheer disbelief. This tired-looking, plainly dressed woman wasn't just some random traveler. She was the wife of the jet's owner, the jet Ethan had just stepped off of. Her mind raced, replaying every word she'd said to Maya earlier. The condescension, the judgment, the outright mockery, it all came back to her in sharp, humiliating detail. Ethan glanced briefly toward the flight attendants, his expression unreadable but polite. Rachel hoped for a moment of acknowledgement, but he didn't linger. Instead, he turned back to Maya, guiding her gently toward the private jet's entrance. As they walked past, Maya didn't look at Rachel. She didn't need to. Her quiet grace spoke volumes, leaving Rachel to grapple with the weight of her assumptions and the lesson they carried. As Ethan guided Maya toward the jet, he paused for a moment and turned toward the group of flight attendants. His warm smile was gone, replaced by a calm but serious expression. His gaze settled on Rachel, who instantly stiffened under his piercing eyes. "Excuse me," Ethan began, his voice steady but firm. The quiet command in his tone made everyone stop what they were doing. "I couldn't help but notice how you treated my wife earlier." Rachel's face flushed as her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. She opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan raised a hand, cutting her off gently but decisively. "I understand you might have assumed something about her when she walked in," he continued, his words measured. "But let me give you a piece of advice, one I've learned the hard way. It's important to treat everyone with respect. You never know who they are or what they've been through." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone. Rachel's carefully constructed facade cracked, and she shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. Her confidence from earlier was gone, replaced by the sinking realization that she'd let her prejudice and arrogance lead her astray. Maya watched the interaction quietly, her heart swelling with gratitude for Ethan. She could see how much he wanted to defend her, but she also knew he wasn't someone who enjoyed putting others down. His reprimand was meant to teach, not humiliate, and that made her love him even more. Rachel stammered an apology, her voice barely audible. Ethan nodded, acknowledging her effort but not dwelling on it. He turned back to Maya, his expression softening instantly. "You okay?" he asked, his hand resting protectively on her lower back. Maya smiled gently, nodding. "I'm fine," she said, her voice calm and steady. She glanced at Rachel for a brief moment, but there was no trace of malice or triumph in her eyes. Instead, she turned her attention back to Ethan and said softly, "Thank you." Ethan leaned down and kissed her forehead again, his hand tightening slightly on her waist. Together they continued toward the jet, leaving the stunned silence of the terminal behind them. Maya's humility and grace were her quiet response to everything Rachel had thrown at her. She didn't need to gloat or hold on to anger. She had everything she needed in that moment: the love and respect of her husband, and the peace of knowing who she truly was. Ethan led Maya up the staircase to the private jet, his arm steady around her waist, guiding her with care. He carried her bag effortlessly, his every movement showing how much he cherished her. At the top of the steps, he paused, glancing back to make sure she was steady before helping her onto the plush, carpeted floor of the cabin. The interior of the jet was stunning, sleek leather seats, polished wood paneling, and soft lighting that created a sense of serene luxury. But for Ethan, the only thing that mattered was Maya's comfort. "Here, love," he said, guiding her to the coziest seat. He placed her bag gently in the storage compartment before kneeling in front of her. "Are you sure you're okay? Do you need anything before we take off?" Maya smiled, her heart full. "I'm fine, Ethan. Really, you're always taking care of me." "And I always will," he replied, brushing a stray curl from her face. The jet's crew approached with warm smiles, their professionalism matched by genuine kindness. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Carter," one of them said, offering Maya a glass of water. Another brought a soft pillow and a blanket, ensuring she was completely comfortable for the flight. "Thank you," Maya said softly, touched by their thoughtfulness. Ethan watched as the crew catered to Maya with respect and care, the way she deserved to be treated. It was such a stark contrast to the way Rachel had acted earlier, and the thought made him all the more protective of his wife. Once Maya was settled, Ethan took his seat beside her, reaching for her hand. He gave it a gentle squeeze, his gaze filled with love and reassurance. As the jet began to taxi down the runway, Maya looked out the window. The terminal was shrinking in the distance, and with it, the memory of Rachel's cruel words. Here, in this space filled with warmth and love, she felt truly at peace. Ethan leaned closer, whispering, "This is your moment to rest, okay? Let me take care of everything else." Maya nodded, resting her head on his shoulder as the jet lifted into the sky, carrying them away from the judgment and toward a future built on love, respect, and all they had overcome together. Rachel stood by the terminal window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she watched the sleek private jet take off into the clouds. The hum of the engines faded into the distance, but the moment lingered, pressing heavily on her mind. She replayed every detail in her head, the way she had sneered at Maya, the careless words she had spoken, and the quiet grace with which Maya had carried herself through it all. The truth of who Maya was? The love and respect Ethan had shown her, and the subtle reprimand Rachel had received left no room for denial. She had been wrong, deeply wrong. Rachel's cheeks burned with shame. She had judged Maya based on her appearance, assuming she didn't belong in a world of luxury and success. But as she stood there, watching the sky where the jet had disappeared, she realized how shallow and misguided those assumptions had been. The narrator's voice breaks through the scene, reflecting on the lesson learned. Life has a way of humbling us, of reminding us that appearances are often deceiving. Everyone carries a story, struggles, and triumphs we cannot see. It costs nothing to treat others with kindness and respect, yet the value of doing so is immeasurable. Rachel learned this lesson the hard way, and perhaps it was a lesson we all need to remember. True worth isn't defined by wealth, status, or appearances. It's found in the way we treat others, and in the quiet dignity with which we carry ourselves through life. For Maya, her strength and humility shone brighter than any luxury could. For Ethan, his love and loyalty spoke volumes about the kind of man he was. And for Rachel, the day served as a reminder that kindness is the bridge that connects us all, regardless of who we are or where we come from. Rachel turned away from the window, her posture less rigid now. She silently vowed to carry this lesson forward, to see people for who they truly were, rather than who she assumed them to be. And as the terminal returned to its usual rhythm, the story of Maya and Ethan remained, a testament to love, humility, and the transformative power of compassion. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this story today. We hope it left you with a little something to reflect on about kindness, respect, and the power of humility. If you enjoyed this journey with us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. And if you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. It really helps us out. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below and share this story with someone who might need a little reminder about treating others with kindness. Until next time, take care, stay humble, and keep spreading good vibes. See you in the next video.